I want to start off by talking about some signs that people can look for if they suspect that they have an unhealthy relationship with either food or their bodies. What are some signs they can look out for?
That's a really good question, and it can be a pretty long list. But I think one of the most important things to ask yourself is how much you're thinking about food and the body. I would say, if you can keep a running log of every morsel of food that you've put into your mouth this week, that's probably a sign that you're giving it a lot of energy. Also, when it comes to the body, it can show up as a lot of body checking. So, any kind of reflective surface or how often you're looking in the mirror, or maybe, every time that you go to the bathroom, you're like pulling up your shirt to see if you've lost the weight or or maybe you've gained some. There's a lot of preoccupation with food in the body. There's a lot of thought around, there can be a lot of like rules and rituals. So how we then maybe organize our life around food. That could be maybe not attending social functions that you may once have found that you may have enjoyed in the past for fear of what might be served, or maybe the timing around it, or maybe you have really strong rules around when you can eat. I can't eat before 10 a.m. or I can't eat before noon, or I can only eat certain kinds of foods. Maybe I skip entire food groups altogether. Maybe I've cut out fat. Maybe I've cut out, all animal protein. And not to say that a vegetarian diet is disordered. It just can be a stepping stone to that. So it's getting really honest with yourself about why you're choosing to eat the way that you're choosing. If an unhealthy relationship to food often will then lead to these feelings of shame and guilt afterward. So it's like, if I eat this food or if I break my rule, whatever that rule is, it's often followed by an extreme spiral of shame and guilt, being like, I shouldn't have eaten that. I was bad for eating that. I could have been better. I was better yesterday. What's wrong with me? I just wish that I could just she's not eating that. I wish I could just eat like somebody else, or I wish I just wasn't so preoccupied with food or with my body. There's a lot of head noise. There's a lot of narrative that's going on inside that isn't necessarily directly related to what you're consuming. So I would say those are some pretty critical red flags around how emotionally charged food can be for a person is a good indicator of how it is playing then out in their life.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, and then how preoccupied you are with your body, how much you're weighing yourself, how much you're weighing maybe your food. Oftentimes Katie and I will ask people about is going down the hatch in a consult, but we rarely say, tell me about your diet. We often say, what is your relationship to food? How would you describe your relationship to food? Do you have any food rules? So instead of them saying, yesterday I was quote unquote good, and I, didn't go to Chick-fil-A, or I say, what did you eat yesterday? And they're like, I was bad yesterday. Then we already know that there's some sort of, potentially disordered eating there, because they're already labeling themselves good or bad around food. And oftentimes we will have our patients throw their scales away, because weight is a horrible metric of health. And yet so many women get caught in this weight spiral and become actually obsessed with scales or weighing their food. So, again, it really is about how rigid or how bendy are you around food? Like, are you flexible? Like, can you, show up at a party and eat whatever's there and not worry about what's there, not eat beforehand because you were freaking out that, there was going to be gluten at the party. And again, obviously there's like celiac disease where you need to like actually worry about that. But then there's oftentimes disordered eating where there's so many rigid rules around food that it then impacts your life. And so that's what, Katie and I often see with many of our patients is maybe not an overeating disorder, but lots of head noise around food that really distracts people from actually enjoying their life.
I think one last one, just to add this in, because I think it's a really common one that we've really normalized in society. I mean, if you're at any kind of weekend trip with people, you'll hear people say like, diet starts Monday, or I'm going to have to make up for this in some way. So it's using food as currency. I can only have that if I do this, or because I had this, now I have to do this. It's using this as an exchange with yourself of manipulating behavior, not just being able to be present and to be in relationship with the food that you consumed and then let it go. It really becomes this dialogue of like, I have to do this because I did that. And that's where we can get into a sticky situation of like, it becomes currency, and it becomes this ritual of all or nothing for a lot of people.
It's so interesting. As you guys are saying all these examples, I'm like, my gosh,
me and all my friends, especially in our 20s, we all had disordered eating. Like I will never forget. I don't know why this is popping up in my mind. I had a friend come over and she always kind of managed her weight and had, a unique relationship with food. And I remember she said, "Oh my gosh, you're going to have all that fruit. Like that's so much sugar." And obviously we can talk about like the blood sugar impact of that. That's separate. But I was like, oh my God. And these are the things that kind of go in our mind in our 20s and we overthink stuff. So I'm just curious, how did we all get dysregulated with food? You guys see so many women, so many patients. So where do you think that is really coming from?
It's a really good question. And, I think to realize how we get off track, we have to realize that our bodies are born with an innate way to be with food and to regulate our health. You watch any baby or any kid, that they cry and they want to eat on demand when they're infants. And then when they're toddlers, they, if they're going through a growth spurt, maybe they're eating more food. And then maybe the next day they didn't really move their bodies as much, or for whatever reason, they're not as hungry. That's why sometimes they're ravenous. They're eating everything in sight. And then the next day they have 3 bites of their dinner and then they're off playing. That is our innate ability to regulate our hunger and fullness. And we are born with a very perfect system of how to do that if we're given the opportunity to listen to it. For a variety of reasons, it can be diet culture, it can be our parents' influence around us and our environment around food. But also it can be just really kind of logical things like going to school. So whereas a kid may like maybe their hunger cue is telling them, I actually do really well if I can eat lunch at 11 a.m. But you're in school now, so you can't just eat anytime that you want to. Now you have to wait until the lunch period. And so we have these all kinds of ways. They put a wrench into the gear of our hunger fullness cues and that hormonal system that's regulating our appetite very, very well. But then we have all of these things that we bump into. So it may be actual like logistics of school and timing and work. It also may be the fact that, then it's like you get these other influences. You're seeing what other people are eating. You're hearing all of this talk that we all have around our bodies. When you start to really key into it, you can hear people have all kinds of really loaded ideas and belief patterns about what our bodies should or shouldn't look like, what foods are good, what foods are bad. And then we start to outsource to the external world, to scales, to diets, to macro counting, to intermittent fasting. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we can manipulate our food intake and manipulate our bodies. But the core issue is that we have outsourced it to as though it's something outside of us. There's got to be this thing outside of me that can do this better because I have lost all trust in my physical body. And that, I think, it's abundant in messaging. Any magazine, the weight loss, any New Year's Day resolution, if you ever watch television and watch the commercials, it's like we are bombarded with ideas around the fact that being in a healthy body and being at a weight that is manageable for your system must be really, really hard. You must have to white knuckle it. It's like almost impossible to do. I think there's all of this narrative that pushes us to not trust ourselves and to not trust this really perfect system that we were born with, but we've lost touch with.
Yeah, that's so interesting when you were talking. And just like Yasmin said, it seems like we've all been through this version of what you're saying. I know when I started to really get into the space of health and I went back to my master's, it's like that phenomenon in med school when you start to learn about things and then you think you have every disease that you learn about. It's like the same thing happened when you start to learn about nutrition, learn about the impact of all these foods on our body, learn about paleo, learn about this. You think like, gosh, all of this food is forbidden. And if I eat it, then I'm bad or I need to, starve myself or whatever it is. So let's talk about hunger a little bit. And I want to also go into the topic of a body that's starving for nutrients, because so often what we see is people who just want to cut back on calories. So they're like, I just need to not eat as much. But then what ends up happening is that they're eating so little that they might be starving for nutrients. So let's talk about hunger versus cravings. And when is our body signaling to us, like, you might be starving for something more?
Hunger versus cravings. I heard a podcast with Mel Robbins and she was interviewing somebody and it was just very cool to hear there is a very significant difference between hunger, fullness, and cravings. They're driven by totally different hormonal pathways. And so there we have our hunger and our fullness hormones, which is ghrelin and leptin. And ghrelin is easy to remember. That's your hunger hormone. And kind of like the ghrelin part sounds like your stomach's growling. So it's an easy way to remember it. So, when you are hungry and your brain is starving for glucose, ghrelin gets secreted and says, triggers essentially dopamine to say, or no, not dopamine, it'll trigger you to go get food. And then leptin will tell you when you're full. And that's triggered with a few things, but basically pressure on the stomach wall. And then you stop eating. So and that's when you watch kids in a really cool way. Like they start when they're hungry and they stop when they're full. And like Katie was saying, like there's so many ways that has gotten shut off over periods of time and as we get older. And then dopamine is the thing that triggers cravings. And Katie and I have done a ton of research on dopamine, and dopamine is the molecule of more. Like as soon as you are actually doing the thing, like you can't stop thinking about chocolate, because when you eat chocolate, it actually increases dopamine, and dopamine feels good, right? Like cocaine is one of the biggest triggers of dopamine in the body and for addiction, for a reason, because it spikes dopamine incredibly high, which feels really good, but for a short period of time. So what dopamine is doing is it's triggering I want the thing, I'm thinking about the thing, and I want more of it. But as soon as you eat say you eat the piece of chocolate, dopamine decreases, and then then you swallow it and you're done. What do you want to do? Like you want more. And so I will often have patients when they say, I crave sugar, or I crave salt, or I crave wine. They can't stop thinking about it at 3:00, and they get confused whether they're hungry or it's actually a craving. And so the thing with a craving is it will go away. If you ignore it, hunger gets worse. So that's one thing. And then the other is, if you think you want, say, the glass of wine, or say you want the chocolate because you think you're hungry, ask yourself if you would eat a bowl of vegetables at that point. And if the answer is yes, you're actually hungry. And if the answer is no, it's probably a craving. So there's some distinctions that we can have people walk themselves through, like deciphering hunger and fullness versus cravings. But as Katie said, we've just gotten so dysregulated with our relationship with food and our relationships with our body. So retraining fullness and hunger can take time. I mean, it really takes consciousness and time.
I think the other thing to comment here is that when we have, it's this idea of the forbidden fruit too. So this idea that when we don't allow ourselves to ever eat the foods that we actually really love, and that restriction can come from, that restrictive mindset can come from actually denying yourself the food, or indulging in the food, but not really giving yourself permission, right? It's like, I may be eating this food, but I didn't actually give myself permission to eat this food. And I feel this huge shame and guilt spiral. Then there's this whole narrative of like, this will be the last piece of cake I ever eat. I'm never doing this again. Or I can't eat this because it makes me people have a laundry list of reasons of why they can and why they can't eat certain foods. So the restriction can come from actually physically denying yourself, or mentally denying yourself and indulging otherwise. That often will lead to this immense amount of craving, because it's like you're white knuckling. You can only do it for so long. And then when you're presented with that option of food that you have a distorted view around, maybe you really think it's bad, or it's really going to make you fat, or it's really inflammatory, whatever label you've put on it. When it's that extreme or that intense in your body, then you're like, it's like the screw it flag gets waved. And you're like, well, screw it. I'm just going to eat this food regardless. That can also drive the craving too. So the chocolate could be a craving because it, we like it and makes us feel good. And sometimes we just want a piece of chocolate. It also can be that chocolate bar, like talking to you in the cupboard all night long, and you're like white knuckling. Maybe you go into the fridge and you like open the fridge, and then you shut the fridge, and then you're back at the couch, and then you're somehow you find yourself back in the kitchen. That also can be that craving piece of it, is like, because we have a skewed relationship to that food, it becomes this forbidden fruit. It's like, as soon as you tell a toddler no, what do they want to do? It's like they want to go eat that food. They want that thing more than anything because you've told them that they can't. And so that can also drive this craving train that isn't necessarily hunger and or fullness, but it can be a result of our relationship to that food as well.
Gosh, I can think of like two great examples of what you just said, Katie. When we go to Italy, our family goes to Italy from time to time, and we're like, we're going to eat pizza and pasta the entire time. And you like, we're not even going to think about it. After like day 3, your body's like, you know what? I'm good. I'm good on this pizza. I'm good on this pasta. I'm good on this wine. Like, where are my vegetables? So it's such a good example of how when you just kind of say like, yeah, I'm going to have that food and I'm not going to feel guilty about it. I'm not going to overthink it, that your body for the most part will regulate itself and say like, okay, that was great. We did that. And now let's get back to healthy eating or get back to the foods that we know that make us feel good. And then the second example I can think of is pregnancy. So like right now I'm not restricting myself, right? So I'm 28 weeks pregnant. And I'm like, I want this baby to grow beautifully. I'm not going to like put myself on any sort of a diet. I want to eat like what my body wants, what it's craving. And so I'm not being restrictive at all, which is it's a beautiful 9 months that I love and enjoy because I'm not overthinking it. I'm just kind of giving into what my body wants. And eventually my body also says, yeah, you might want, that donut or this or that, but you also want all of those other healthy things. So there are so many real life examples of like that forbidden fruit, right? If we just stop thinking about it that way and kind of, okay, I'm going to enjoy this, then our body will kind of go back to saying, okay, you did that. And now you can move on to eating the healthy thing too.
Exactly. And I think that takes us to a really beautiful transition into addressing the second part of your last question is like this starvation for nutrients, right? So I was going through eating disorder recovery and naturopathic medical school at the same time, which you can only imagine was a challenging thing for my brain to comprehend. Is like, I actually have to rewrite my relationship to all food. And yet I'm simultaneously learning about how food is interfacing with my body and my health and nutrition, right? It's like, we have so many ideas of like, I can't ever have the donut because there's seed oils in it and it's inflammatory and it's going to spike my blood sugar and it's too inflammatory. And then meanwhile, I'm like, but I have to go eat the donut because like that's part of my homework in actually healing from an eating disorder. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about this because I couldn't wrap my brain around it for the longest time. And exactly what you just said, Kay, is like when we are embodied and we have the ability and the freedom to eat the pizza and the pasta whenever we want to without having the shame and the guilt, we inevitably don't want pizza and pasta every single day. We also want the fiber and the protein, and we are complex beings. We're omnivores. We need a wide variety of nutrients. So the way that we coach our patients is like, if you sit down to a bowl of pasta, typically you might be able to you eat the whole bowl and then you don't feel satisfied. Maybe you want more pasta, or maybe you want, something else after that. That's mostly because it's not a complete meal. We're not getting the fats and the fiber and the protein alongside of the carbohydrates. And our body is craving to satisfy that. Our body can go, it's like, okay, I've had enough carbs, but I haven't had enough protein today. I haven't had enough fiber and I haven't had enough fat. And so your body will actually kind of still continue to, maybe you've met your caloric demand for the day, but you haven't met your nutritional demand for the day. And so what we coach people is like actually building a balanced plate. So there's carbohydrates, there's fat, there's protein, there's fiber, and so carbohydrates, fat, protein, fiber. Yeah. So that's what we want to make sure is on every plate, whether that's a snack or an actual meal. And we tell people you can really pick and choose. Like I like to see half of your plate as vegetables, as fiber, just so that we're getting all that, good phytonutrients. We're feeding our microbiome. We're getting enough of that fiber to help our bowel movements, whatever it may be. And then we've got enough protein. We've got enough healthy fats, and then carbohydrates. I feel like it used to be no fat, low fat. Now it really seems like carbohydrates are the macronutrient of the day that people have struggles with. And so some days your carbohydrate might be pasta. Some days it might be sweet potatoes. Sometimes it might be beets. Sometimes it might be a piece of pizza. But when you sit down to a meal, are you creating a full meal where your body's going to be meeting those nutrient demands? Or are you just kind of the mentality, especially this caloric intake versus caloric output, has told people, if I'm going to have a cookie, then I might as well, I should skip lunch, or I should, not have anything with it. It's actually, you're going to sit down and have a cookie, maybe you have a handful of nuts and a handful of cherries alongside that. We get some fiber, we get some healthy fats, and we have the cookie. We can make this a more balanced option and provide our body with the nutrients that it needs to feel satiated at the end of it. And I think that's a really big, just like you said, you go to Italy, you give yourself permission to eat all of the things. Inevitably, your body actually does crave the nutrients that it needs to be well. And that, again, comes back to not outsourcing our physicality to something outside of us. Our bodies know, our bodies want to be well. We want to heal. We want vegetables. We want fiber. We want to feel good. When we can access that through food while also feeling good mentally and having joy with food and being able to be celebratory and go to Italy and indulge in all that Italy has to offer, it's like, that's the beauty of having a healthy relationship to food. Because conversely, you could go to Italy and restrict yourself the entire time. That's not health either.
I'm so curious. I mean, I have so many questions right now. I love everything you guys are saying. In terms of like retraining yourself when it comes to cravings, I love the example that you just mentioned now, Katie, about eating full meals, and maybe you're not getting that, because that was me. I remember snacking all the time, but at that point I wasn't having like full meals of protein, fiber, and fat and carbs. Now I actually have 3 full meals a day. But are there any other ways that someone can kind of retrain themselves when it comes to cravings? Because even as of yesterday, I had a friend who said, gosh, I can't stop snacking. It's the nighttime that gets me. And I'm like, I don't know what to say. I'm going to definitely share this episode with her. But any other tools, if someone's listening who's like, man, that's me, what else can they maybe start doing?
Blood sugar dysregulation is one of the biggest drivers of cravings we've found. So what we do, and there are studies shown that blood sugar dysregulation is starting in our teens. And, a lot of our clientele is like 40 plus. And so by the time they hit us, there's insulin resistance, there's blood sugar dysregulation, there's cortisol dysregulation, there's neurotransmitter dysregulation, there's food stories going on in their heads. I mean, it's this whole bundle of mess to unwind. And it's not really that challenging if they follow protocol, right? Which is get back in their body. Because it's not, Katie and I were just saying before we hopped on with you guys, like it's not a challenging relationship with food. It is a challenging relationship with your body that plays out with food. And so what we coach people on is but a protein forward diet, and at making sure, and it's not about avoiding anything or eliminating anything or any of their food rules play out. It's like, you can eat whatever you want as long as you're getting between 20 and 30 grams of protein per meal. And there is a formula for, based on weight, but like just to make it pretty simple for, again, like most of our clientele are females, between 20 and 30 grams, because if you're getting protein and fat and fiber, like Katie was saying, and complex carbohydrates, and your body is getting those nutrient needs, then we have noticed that these numbers aren't real, but like 90% of people don't have cravings anymore because their blood sugar is actually regulated. And so many people have dysregulated blood sugar. And what I mean by that is that, say, Susie Q thinks that, intermittent fasting is great. So she wakes up at 7, but she has this rule in her head that she can't eat till noon, but at 8:30, she's hungry. But she blasts through it because she's just drinking coffee, and coffee will suppress appetite and mess with blood sugar at the same time. Then you're stressing out your adrenal glands. You're asking your liver to actually make glucose. And then insulin, as soon as any glucose, whether it's made by your liver or from food, gets dumped into the bloodstream, then insulin is secreted from your pancreas. And now your whole body is already working as though it's eaten, but it's under a stressful way, right? Because it's not actually coming from food. Then noon hits, she's starving. And she reaches for, pasta or she goes through Chick-fil-A because she's like famished at that point, or actually has a protein shake. And then, by then her body is just pretty dysregulated. Insulin is still high. Insulin is also a storage hormone. So then you're storing fat with any of the extra glucose that's happening. Then by 3:00, she's again crashed out because of elevated insulin levels. I mean, I can keep going, but it's like, it just becomes this disaster. And so by 3:00, she's craving chocolate, wine, sugar, or popcorn. and then starts just going through the fridge, is eating before dinner because she's actually starving and quote unquote craving things and not even thinking about what she's putting in her mouth. Then dinner rolls around. She's not really that hungry, but she's committed to eating with her family. So she actually eats, but then goes to bed feeling full. That will dysregulate blood sugar. It'll actually store more fat. And then she calls us because she's gained weight. She has no energy. Her hormones are all over the place. She can eat ice cubes, but she's intermittent fasting, but she's gaining weight. And then craving sugar like a banshee because her blood sugar is all over the place and her insulin levels are too high. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was like the train of physiology that happens to too many people. And so when Katie and I bust in and say, you actually stop intermittent fasting, we're going to regulate your meals. You're going to eat 3 meals a day. Yeah. As like you just said, like instead of the snacking, which is just very confusing to the adrenal glands and very confusing to the blood sugars. Like if you can actually eat a complete meal, like Katie was saying, with getting all of your nutrient density, all of your nutrient needs met in that one sitting, then your body has the fuel to stay balanced and to stay regulated until the next meal, which is like 3 or 4 or 5 hours later. Then you eat again, a balanced meal, and then stays regulated 3 to 4 hours. So your blood sugar's not tanking out, reaching for more glucose, because that's what happens. The brain and the muscles are the number one consumers of glucose in the body. I mean, the brain, as soon as it senses any low blood sugar in the body, it will crave and it will send out, and it wants glucose fast. And so when people get to that like really hungry, like I'm quote unquote starving phase, they'll typically, the eyes will only see sugar. So then they're reaching for the candy bars, the glass of wine, the easy carbohydrates, but then that will spike blood sugar and drop them out again. Mm-hmm. So again, it's teaching people to actually get regulated with food, build complete plates, whether that's an actual meal or a snack, like Katie was saying, just to like make sure that the body is getting all the nutrients it needs. And Katie said it earlier, it's not, we're not saying eat the macros, carbohydrates, fiber, fat, and protein, because that's what the food pyramid said. It's like, we're not plants. We don't photosynthesize. We actually need a complex compounds coming from the outside world. And when you give your body those things coming from a whole foods place, your cravings most likely will go away on their own.
Mm-hmm. How do we kind of tune out the noise? Because there is so much noise, especially on social media. And I remember at a certain point following the advice of a particular health guru who was really about the keto movement. And that didn't work for my body. It messed with my lipids. I dropped way too much weight. I didn't feel great. And then you have another guru who's saying, don't drink almond milk. It's the devil. It's the worst thing for you ever. It's destroying everything, your gut, the environment. Then you have somebody else saying something else. So how do you work with your patients to help them tune all of that out and tune into their bodies? Because I'm sure there's even people that come to you that something might be working for you, but it's not going to work for them, and vice versa.
I think, again, it's getting back in relationship with our body. I think so often we don't actually know what's going on. And we think that, again, some diet or some external thing to us is going to be the magic key to a body we love. We're not actually with it. So we're not like actually mindful when we're eating. We're not actually with our bodies. We're not actually tuning into like, that actually makes me feel really good when I eat that. Just like you said, it's like somebody may thrive on a keto diet and they feel their best and they feel clear-headed and they feel, like there are real things as therapeutic diets. Food is so powerful. It's such a powerful needle mover for health. And yet we are individualized. And so getting back into our bodies and really tuning into what feels good for us. Again, it is this idea of like, we can step into intuitive eating. The thing with intuitive eating though, is that we have to be able to kind of like unlock our intuition again, because so often we're dictated by external thoughts or beliefs or somebody on Instagram, or we're dictated by a dopamine dysregulation or a blood sugar dysregulation, or a really tortured relationship with certain kinds of foods. And until we start to get that stuff out of the way, we can't really be in our bodies. Because how do I know, for me in particular, is one of my sticking points was like, okay, well, I know I shouldn't be eating a ton of gluten and I know I shouldn't be eating a ton of dairy because of the health impacts of that. And yet that is actually going to be the ticket for me to have a healthy relationship to food, is to eat the gluten and eat the dairy. And for me, it was checking in with myself of like, why am I really doing this? Am I choosing not to have gluten and dairy because I don't like myself, and that if I could just eliminate that, I'd finally lose the weight. I'd finally be in a body that I love. My life would be perfect, right? I put so much meaning on not having that gluten and dairy versus now I often choose not to have a ton of gluten and a ton of dairy in my life because I don't feel my best. And I love myself enough to know that that isn't a choice that really works for me. And yet sometimes I can choose to have the gluten and the dairy and maybe not necessarily feel my best because it made my mouth happy, or I had this like really amazing date night, or I just had this different relationship to food rather than just being so strict. And so I think we start to get some of that noise out of the way and get back in our body. The other way that we can really start to regulate that relationship to food is to not eat distracted. So don't eat at the kitchen counter, don't eat at your computer, don't eat in front of the television, don't eat while you're driving. Really be focused and present with your food. Bring your brain and your body to the meal. And so then we can actually start to check in with ourselves as we're eating, like, how full am I? How do I feel? Maybe checking in with yourself after you eat. You know what? I feel really sluggish after I had that meal. I'm not going to make that mean like I did something wrong. I'm just going to take that in for future information. Just like you, it's like you try the keto diet and you realize how your body responded, and you were in tune enough with your body to know that that was really not serving you. Now, someone else may have been in the exact same situation as UK and been like, this is awesome, I lost a lot of weight, right? And so they continue to be in a diet that isn't serving their blood work, that isn't actually serving their life, and they don't feel very good in their body, but they have this external goal that isn't health focused. And I think that's the really important indication. Is the same behavior could look it could look on the outside the exact same, but it can feel very, very different within ourselves. And so I think bringing that body awareness is a huge, huge, huge help in starting to drown out what everybody else says, because it's actually your body knows best if you just tune in.
Yeah, I tell my patients, like, the best doctor is the one that you're in, which is your body. And we have divorced our bodies. And again, like myself going through eating disorder recovery and coming back to my body. I mean, Katie said it so beautifully when I first started. She was like, it's actually just like coming home. It's like a friend that has been texting you I'm 44, for like 40 years. And I finally am responding to text messages. And those text messages were like, hey, like, I'm here, I'm healthy, I'm strong, like, let's hang out. And, the other thing too is, I think, for many of our patients, it's giving them permission. That's all they need, right? It's the permission to listen to their body. It's the permission to actually fall back in love with food. It's the permission to ignore Instagram. It's the permission to actually go within. I mean, we just got off the phone with a patient this morning it was her first visit with us. And we were talking about food. And she was like, well, I do this protein shake every morning. Is that what I should be doing? I said, well, do you like it? She was like, what? I said, well, do you like it? She said, no, I don't. It makes me super bloated, and it has for years. I was like, well, then why are you doing it? I said, no, it's time to find a new protein powder or do something different for breakfast. But her mind was blown. The fact that, and then she was like, well, what about lunches? I said, what do you like to eat? She said, well, I was doing the protein powder, but now I don't know. And I said, well, do you like chicken salad? She said, well, yeah, but it has mayonnaise in it. I said, do you like mayonnaise? She said, well, yeah, but it's fat. I said, we're going to have a conversation about food, right? So, it's also like giving people permission to actually fall in love with the things that they may have been told are bad, or that they can't eat, or that fat's bad, or steak has too much cholesterol, or eggs are bad, or butter is bad. And, it's just it's disheartening to us that, the cover of Time magazine dictates what goes in people's grocery carts instead of what they actually love. And so it's giving people permission to just get back in relationship with the thing that is keeping them alive, and then how it is in their actual body.
Such a good point about the physiological effects of our thoughts on our food. And I would love for there to be more studies on that, because I do think it's so powerful what our thoughts can actually do. And there's a study with I think I might get this wrong, 2 different types of milkshakes. They were, I think, identical, but one was told that they were it was like a low sugar one, and one was told it was high. And the people who thought that theirs was low sugar had a lower blood sugar impact just because they thought that it was lower in sugar. And I just think that's so fascinating, because if you are doing everything right, you think you're eating all the right foods, you're having this protein shake that you can't stand, that's got to be doing something bad for your body, not actually something good. It's got to be messing with your digestion. Can you guys speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I pray for more studies like that too, just because the power of the mind is, I think, really untapped, and yet we're seeing it more and more. I think, at least in this space of like health and wellness, people are starting to talk about how our thoughts are talking to every cell in our body and can have a physiological response outside of just of that, not just that. That's like miraculous and amazing, and our bodies are so cool to be able to do that. But just bringing it back to what we really do concretely know, and what there is a lot of research around, is just our stress response. It's like if we sit down to to a meal or to a dessert and we're super stressed out about it, but we actually want it, but it's like there's this whole like narrative and then shame and guilt around it. And like, I mean, we've all been there, where it's just that dessert becomes something that we take into the rest of the evening. It's not just we eat the dessert and then we're done with it. Now we're stressing out about it and we're raising our cortisol. What cortisol will do is turns off digestion. So then we're not digesting our food very well. Our stomachs are often more likely to get bloated. There's a lot more dysbiosis. There's all of these cascading events that can happen because we're stressed out about what we're eating. So you could be eating the perfect diet, whatever that means, but like you could be eating, I don't know, #clean or whatever that looks like for you. Like I'm not going to define it for people, but whatever that looks like for you, you could feel really good about the choices that you're making. But if you're stressed out about it and you're like worried about going to the barbecue because there's not going to be any food, or you have to pack a lunch everywhere that you go because there's not going to be any options, and you're just so stressed out about what you like, and you're thinking about your food all the time and you're thinking about your body all the time, that means that you now have, yes, you may be eating nutrient dense foods, but your body is under so much stress from thinking about the food that you're eating. Stress is it's one of the most inflammatory things that we have, that we bump up against in our day-to-day life. And so with food it's like this kind of net effect. It's like, okay, well, if I'm so stressed out about it, I'm probably not getting the nutrients from that food because my digestion has slowed, and I'm just swimming in cortisol all the time. So now add chronic inflammation to the mix and blood sugar dysregulation because I'm so stressed out. It's like we can see how the stress response around your diet or around your food creates a bigger issue physiologically than the food it does itself. So it's like you could eat that cupcake and not really care, and then just move on with your day, and then just go back to how you normally eat, which is lots of fiber and lots of protein and lots of healthy fat, and like it's part of your healthy diet. Or you can just obsess over that cupcake, or obsess over the fact that you wanted it so badly but you couldn't have it. It's like there's all these ways that we could create stress in our body around food. And I think that is the real key to why this can be so damaging for people.
Yeah, that definitely resonates. I feel like anytime that I feel restrictive, I just get more stressed. And I'm like, well, this defeats the whole purpose of whatever I'm trying to do, whether it's a new wellness protocol I want to, start. I mean, Kay and I are, meeting with amazing women like you every week. So there's always something new, and I have to rein myself in and be like, you know what, that actually doesn't work for me. Or for example, my husband and I are family planning, and everyone has different thoughts around fertility, right? And you can easily get in the mix of that. And then he has to remind me, you're just going to be stressed. It's not worth it. So it's finding the balance of like what feels good to your body. And of course, like I'm still working through that. And, in my 20s, it was different now in my 30s and then late 30s. So I just love all these examples, because you're right. If I knew that stress component kind of defeats the purpose of what I'm doing, I probably would make different decisions, in my younger self. So I just wanted to highlight that. So, one question that I also have, and this might be straightforward and simple, but I still think a lot of people are confused around if they're eating a particular food, how do we know if it works well for us? Like, for example, you were meeting with someone who said, I was having the smoothie, but I was bloated for years. I think there's so many women who might be listening who might be eating things and not realize like how they're feeling might not be good, and how they have potential to feel significantly better with the right foods.
Yeah. So I think it can be from multiple, I'm trying to think how to best explain this, because it's like there can be lots of reasons why we're out of touch with how we feel. Maybe it's because, we're eating a standard American diet and we've never experienced feeling good in our body. I think there's a lot of people that fall into that camp. It's like, we're eating a lot of processed foods. where, that's also not intuitive eating. I would argue is like eating a standard American diet is not actually being in touch with your body and how you feel, but it could just be the fact that they've never given themselves an opportunity to, add in more protein, add in more fiber, add in more healthy fat to feel their body kind of find that equilibrium and find that balance. So that could be one reason. The other reason also could be, I'll use myself as an example. Again, going back to that gluten and dairy free, is like I had it in my head that I could not be healthy if I had gluten and dairy in my diet. Like that was just something that I was obsessive about. And then realizing that I actually had to give up that belief and start to create a healthy relationship with all foods. And that included all kinds of gluten and all kinds of dairy. And for me, I had to really steep in the idea that I was up to bigger healing, that me healing from an eating disorder and creating a healthy relationship with food was more profound for my health in the long term than avoiding maybe some glyphosate on some gluten. You know what I mean? It's like I had to come to terms with what was actually going to work for me. I was so anxious that every time I ate gluten and dairy that I would get bloated. I would create all of these symptoms in my brain because I was so anxious about the food itself. So I think it's important to kind of differentiate what's causing that, of like, how can we really be clear around what is actually working for us, what isn't working for us. And if you are in the position where you're, pretty obsessive about food, or you're thinking a lot about it, or you have very strong belief systems of like, oh, I could never have that, or I could never eat that regularly. Oh, that makes me really bloated. And, it's just like my skin breaks out and like whatever it may be. That may be true, but also creating that healthy relationship with that food for a while so that you can be very sure that it's the food, not the stress around the food, that's causing those symptoms. And I think that's a really hard delineation for people. And then also, it's like there are certain times where just, avoiding that food for a period of time can be helpful to see how your body responds. There's a time and a place for an elimination diet. There's a time and a place for, avoiding certain foods to get to the root cause of what's going on with, your IBS or your autoimmune disorder or your acne or whatever. Because like so many people will come into our office and they're expecting us to put them on an elimination diet. Go off gluten, go off dairy, go off sugar, go off alcohol. You'll be fine, right? And yet so often when I do that, these people, maybe they can do it for 2 weeks, maybe they can do it for 3 weeks, but then they inevitably kind of fall off the wagon and then they go back to eating the way that they did. I think that's a very strong indicator that they weren't ready for that elimination diet because there was so much loaded opinion about food and they just like, that was them white knuckling, not actually having a healthy, balanced relationship to food. So I'm not sure if that kind of answers your question, but I think that there could be kind of multiple paths to the same destination for different people.
Yeah. And I think too, just going back to the patient that we were talking to this morning, it's like, she's 74 years old, she's been around the sun a few times. And all of a sudden I just said, well, you tell me, like, what do you actually like to eat? What if that was the question? And with no rules, no shoulds, no shame, no guilt, like, can we just take those guys out of the room for a hot minute and tell me what your favorite foods are? And starting to play that game, and then watching people then start to attach shame, guilt. Oh, that food makes me bloated. Oh, that food I vomited on when I was little and I can't stand the smell. Get all of the stuff out of the way for just a minute, and then write down all of your favorite foods. If your last meal, and shame and guilt aren't there. And then we can start to dive into, what are you then telling yourself about those foods? Are you allowed to have them? Are you not allowed to have them? Are you a bad person if you have them? Are you cheating if you have them? And then like Katie was saying, then we can start to like, how do you actually feel in your body when you eat them? Is that actually the food? Is that actually the stress? Going through eating disorder recovery again, like I was actually talking to my team about this, because how do you, and we're in the sort of the extreme basket, which is eating disorders. I was like, how do you, as the nutritionists on my team, help people differentiate between, actual food allergies, food sensitivities, dysbiosis, candida, low stomach acid that will cause bloating, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Versus stories about food that are then dysregulating their nervous system such that they're then experiencing these symptoms, right? So it becomes a pretty interesting dance between what is actual physiology, what is in your head, is it a combination of both, of course, and then giving people permission to just go play with food. And again, like Katie was saying, there is always a time and place for elimination diets and therapeutic diets. We use them constantly. And we have noticed that also weaning people off of them to maintain health, true health in their body, you have to create and get to create regulation around food to actually be free in your body and free with food in your body. So it's like Katie said, I mean, there's multiple paths to the same destination. And yet, so it's like very individualized for each of our patients to handhold them to a safe place with food and in their body. And then, obviously for celiac is an extreme version of like gluten just period doesn't work for those people. And so then supporting them around how do we boost their physiology such that, we can support their immune system so deeply that when they're exposed to gluten, it doesn't throw them off so badly.
I think it also just creates an environment for people to be successful in their health journey, right? It's like so many people will try a diet and 90% of diets fail, right? Because we can't stick to it, because there's all of this noise going on about our belief system, about ourselves and about our worth and then we manifest that or we play that out with food. And I think, we can put someone on an elimination diet for a period of time, but it's always the reintroduction period that is the hardest. People find like, oh, I couldn't stand it anymore. And then I just had pizza. And it's like, well, you just introduced all kinds of things all at one sitting. And now I have no idea whether it's the pizza, whether it was the stress, whether it was the gluten, whether it was the dairy, whether it was the nightshades. Like, I don't know what was actually going on. I just find that is like it tends to be the most challenging part for people. And it seems to be, at least in our patient population, which are, mostly women between 40 and 75. And it seems to be their belief pattern about food seems to be the thing that gets in the way the most often for them to have like a very sustainable diet throughout the rest of their life. We're not looking for a 6-month cure-all. We're looking for a way of being in your life, a way of being with food, a way of being in your body that can take you the distance. And that I'm never going to live in a world where I just never have a piece of pizza again. I know we're picking on pizza a lot this time, but it's like, that's not sustainable either for me. Right. And so how can I be with that in a way that prioritizes my health, my nutrient demand, my joy, my pleasure? It's like, how can we fold it all in? And I just think it's a conversation that gets lost a lot in the health and wellness sphere of like, how do we, because these foods exist and they're good and they taste good and we want them. So how do we create a healthy relationship with them and also our body? And I just think that tends to set the stage for people to be most successful, at least in our practice, what we've seen.
Yeah, such a good point too with elimination diets. I find that, like you said, there's certain cases if somebody has a full-blown food allergy or they have celiac disease where they have to keep something out of their diet for life and you work with that. But in a lot of cases, in most cases, if you're on your elimination diet or your therapeutic diet for years and nothing is changing, it's probably not working for you. And I feel like I talk to a lot of women who are like, they've cut out entire groups of things for years. I've definitely been there. Katie, I went through, if I accidentally had gluten, like if the waiter gave me gluten, it would send me into a spiral. It was like very, very unhealthy. And sugar, I didn't touch refined sugar for years because I thought that it would destroy my body. And I wasn't getting better in those moments. Like I didn't feel better over years of doing that. So it is a good point. If anybody's listening and you've been on a therapeutic diet for like a year and nothing's happening, like maybe rethink that because it's probably not working out, and maybe adding some more foods back in will be helpful. So Tanda, you mentioned that you like for your patients to list out all the foods that they love. What are some other simple things that women can do today? Maybe like 5 things that they can do if they want to reset their relationship with food that don't feel like a mountain, don't feel unmanageable. What are some tips for them?
I mean, the first one that comes up for me is actually being with your food. Like Katie said, like when you prepare a meal or you order a meal, or if you have to get your meal through a window, be with it. So many of us have, I mean, again, Katie and I have been diving into dopamine. Dopamine is the molecule of more and of the next moment. It's not the present moment. The here and now hormones are neurotransmitters or serotonin and norepinephrine and epinephrine. And so, but dopamine will win always, because dopamine will override because it's more of survival than serotonin is. And so we get to consciously say, take a backseat dopamine, like, because most people are eating, they're like, they were so excited about this burger at their favorite restaurant, but while they're eating the burger, they're thinking about dessert. That's dopamine in play, not actually being present with your food. How does it taste? How do you feel in your body? Chewing it 31 times, putting your fork and knife down in between bites, taking just a breather, just really checking in, like looking at your plate, looking at your environment, thinking about the food. Like if you're eating, a burger and fries, like that whole train of events that it took to get to your plate. I mean, to actually slow down and be with your food is, and I'm speaking for myself, that was one of the hardest things to learn. Mm-hmm. Because, with a history like mine, being with food was terrifying, and I wanted it out of my body as soon as it came in my body. And so the actual thought of experiencing it in my body and being okay with that, it was at first terrifying, and then actually one of the most beautiful handshakes from the outside world to the inside world. And so that's where I would start, is like actually mindful eating.
Mm-hmm. I think also asking yourself what you want to eat, asking like, do I want something cold? Do I want something warm? Do I want something crunchy? Do I want something salty? Do I want something sweet? do I want something raw? Like actually getting into in with your body and asking it, so that to kind of go back to that patient that we have, if she had really asked herself, what do I want to eat this morning, my guess is she wouldn't say the protein powder or the protein shake, right? She might have thought of something like eggs or avocado toast or whatever it may be. But I think just starting to bring yourself to the journey. It's not about what you should be eating. Ask yourself, what do I actually want? What would be most satisfying to me right now? And most often you'll kind of, it's like, well, when we do that, we're starting to build that muscle of listening to our body. So I think that's another good one too. It's just like starting to ask yourself, just run through a list of questions around what you actually are feeling like eating.
Another one is if you can, grow it yourself. If not, shop local.
Yeah.
I just watched something on how spinach. As soon as spinach is picked, it starts to lose vitamin C. And after a 2-week period, it goes from 100% on vine or in the ground. I know spinach doesn't grow on a vine, but like spinach in the ground has 100% vitamin C content. And after, I think it was 2 weeks, has 0. Most of our food travels, I think it's 1,500 miles. And so by the time it's at the grocery store shelf, it's not only dead, it is nutrient dead. And, you may be getting some fiber, but a lot of the nutrients are lost. And so Katie and I, just really encourage our people, even if you grow herbs on your kitchen counter and then you go to the farmer's market as much as you can, or you have Farmer Joe down the road that you can buy half a cow, or, Farmer Jane is selling eggs, like buy as local as you can, not only for the deep connection with food, like it means something when you shake the hand of the farmer. It means something when you started a thing from seed and watched it sprout, and now you're putting it in your salad called basil. Like it's different. Mm-hmm. I don't care who you are, it is different. Mm-hmm. And, I have started 2 farms in my life. And when you're that connected to food, because we're connected beings, I think that's probably the biggest issue in our society right now, is how disconnected we are. It's not because, our food is not nutrient dense. It's not because of chronic stress. It's not because all those are big issues. But I think the deepest issue is how absolutely disconnected we are from food, the environment, and ourselves and each other. And so the more connected you can get to your food based on growing it or buying local, I've seen it just make a huge difference, because when that thing is on your plate and you know who grew it or you did, it's different.
It tastes better too.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say it tastes significantly better.
And there's that.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. That reminds me, this morning, Yasmin was like, what do you do to take a break to feel more energized? And I said, I go to my local food co-op and I look at the produce because it actually makes me feel alive. And I pick up a new fruit or pick up a new vegetable, and you feel the aliveness of the food, especially when it's local, if possible. I know it's not possible for everybody, but if possible, kind of going to your local farmer's market or your local co-op and just seeing the dirt, it just makes you feel so much more vibrant. So I love that tip.
And then kind of last 2 that I would say that are coming to mind for me is, one, make your food beautiful. It's just make it something that is actually nourishing to you. It's something beautiful to look at. You sit down, even if you are running through the drive-through, maybe wait till you get home and put it on a plate and make a meal for yourself. We deserve to be taken care of, and we deserve to take care of ourselves. And that's just one small, simple message that you can give to yourself, that you matter, that you're worth, providing nutrients to, and that you can actually be with it. Instead of eating out of plastic containers, maybe move it into a bowl. Something as simple as that, I think, has really profound messaging to our worth and how much energy and time we'll put into taking care of ourselves. So that's one. And then the last one is, if you're a person who finds themselves saying, I can't have that in the house, or I can't make that because I end up eating the whole thing. If there's certain foods that I would kind of identify that as a trigger food, and you don't have to have an eating disorder to have trigger foods. I've seen it play out with all kinds of, relationships to food. But what I would say in that case is most people think I feel out of control with the food, so I'll avoid it. But in the avoiding is what creates the out of control with food. And so creating corrective experiences with that food. Maybe you have lost kind of trust in yourself around that specific food. And so what that looked like for me is ice cream was a big one. Like if I had ice cream in the house, there was just, I couldn't resist, it's like, or it was just like driving me nuts. And so what I did is I would take myself out on ice cream dates, or I would go with my husband, or I'd go with my, with a friend of mine, and I would go out to the local ice cream parlor. I would pick the flavor that I wanted. We would sit down, we would eat it together. We'd maybe walk around the block till eventually I got to the point where I could trust myself with it. And I realized that I was able to have it whenever I wanted. I lost that charge to the point where I brag, I found a half gallon of ice cream in my freezer that had gone completely freezer burnt. And when I first started this journey, I would never, that would never have been the case. I was like, how could you possibly forget that you have ice cream in the freezer? Like, I can't stop thinking about it when it's in the house. And so it's things like that of creating corrective experiences. Go have it. Chances are you really like it if you can't stop eating it. And so build the relationship, build that trust back in. It doesn't have to be that you have it in the house right away, because maybe that isn't safe for you yet, but go create these corrective experiences, have those foods again in a way that you can show up with them differently, to the point where they're like, it doesn't have this vice grip on you. So that's the other thing that I would say. If you are finding yourself of like, there are these trigger foods that I just really don't feel safe around, try eating them, and eating them frequently.
I love that. Gosh, Katie and Tanda, we always love having you on. So many actionable tips. I mean, I have all these notes written down, but thank you for joining us. We'll definitely include all your information in our show notes. So if anybody wants to meet with you or even follow your content, I'm always learning from you guys. They can definitely find it there. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, ladies.
Conversation that's near and dear to our heart. So we appreciate you.